A very good evening to all our viewers today. Today we have with us a very talented young professional who has worked with diverse clients across industries, guiding them on their sustainability journey. He has worked with Moody's ESG, Carbon Disclosure Project, among others. He has been passionate about sustainability since the starting of his career by studying Masters in Sustainable Business Management from University Adolfo Ibanez and Masters in International Relations and Affairs from University of the Santiago de Chile. Let us all welcome Francisco. Hi, Francisco. How are you doing today?
Hi, Harsha. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. I'm doing very well here. It's morning here in Santiago, so good evening to you in the other part of the world. And thank you for this occasion to talk about ESG in Chile and Latin America. Okay, yes, now we have overcome the technical difficulties. Well, thank you. Answering to your question, when I first started back in the day, I with the master's and postgraduate study, ESG was something in the making that you could find its knowledge by working on it on companies, on firms, on my first job experiences. So when these first programs started to appear, it was really new information, really fresh, out of the oven information regarding responsible investment, ESG, environmental management, and how all companies should start adapting their ways of producing of everything into these new brand frameworks, which were really the new thing back in the day, including the GRI methodology, for example, the SASB methodology, now ESSB. And understanding this context, I'd say I wanted to change. I wanted to change how companies perceive and how they approach these methodologies that guide them towards understanding a better management of their own resources, how they can incorporate stakeholders in their businesses, how they can manage better all aspects that go beyond regulation. And at the same time, I wanted to change the way they report and communicate things by using ESG standards and methodologies, whether it is a tailored report or an annual report or a sustainability report under any well-known endorsed ESG methodology.
Yeah, let's continue. Now
Yeah,
you
I check my
worked with
connections.
Moody's. Am I audible now? Hello?
Yes, you are. You are.
Perfect. You worked with Moody's, Bank of America's early in your career for research and developed ESG frameworks. What are the generic points to be kept in mind while making ESG frameworks?
Well, that's a really interesting question point. I'd say that the general points to be kept in mind while making elaborating is to support yourself in the bases that are already validated out there, being the, for example, Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, the CDP framework, the GRI framework, the SASB framework, which now will be the new ESSBP, which merged itself with the IRFS methodology. So, as in any research in the social sciences or in any discipline, uh, you need to keep in mind uh, a reliable source to quote and then start your own ESG methodology or your own ESG criteria to say, well, here I am, and I am assessing you or assessing stakeholders or companies uh, according to what all these validated frameworks across the world, across many communities of corporate investors like BlackRock validate and they recommend that you should use. And then you can start your own journey and build your own methodology.
That's interesting. So, would you give us some pointers that we should keep in mind while we are framing those ESG frameworks?
Yes, of course. I mean, while you're framing, while any person or company or institution is framing their methodology, you should be keep in mind that, well, I know it may sound obvious for us in this business, but avoid greenwashing at all costs. Like create legitimate KPIs, uh, like for example, really basic one, the carbon emissions or gender balance on the governance board. Those are KPIs and measurements that are the basics. You know, you need to start like quietly from the more basic KPIs and then move up to the more advanced, which lie in the S and G of the ESG spectrum, I'd say.
That's very well said. Now, in your country, are there any laws or regulations for ESG or CSR? Like in India, there is. In some other countries, also they have introduced. So, is
Yes,
there something in your country?
yes, indeed. Since a couple of years ago, or maybe I can remember last year, all listed companies at the stock exchange here by law, they must report a questionnaire to the Financial Authority regulation about their ESG status. So if you want to be a listed company here, once a year, you need to start gathering data and information and report by law ESG KPIs and ESG descriptions of what you're doing, for example, in terms of responsible investment, in terms of how is corporate governance faring in your company. And this really was, to give you some context, a shock to the market because for decades this was voluntarily. So you would have like three companies that would do it voluntarily versus hundreds of them that now are forced to do it by law. And it was a shock because many old-fashioned companies were like, "Why are you asking me to report? I don't know the rate of gender balance in my governance board. That's private. Doesn't concern you." And it's like, well, it does because the European Commission says so, the SASB board says so, and all these methodologies. So it was kind of a shock, but it is by law. Once a year, companies do this exercise, and they have to send all this information to the financial regulatory authority.
Yeah, that's very interesting development in Latin America, I must say that. Now, are the investors or customers keen on checking those in your country while buying products or engaging in services or when they have to fund any company?
Yes, 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 yes. 100 times yes. I'll say you because due to the nature of Chile, we have a lot of natural resources. Chile is a very long and diverse country. In the north, we have many deserts, mining companies. So all these international big companies, like mining companies, exporting companies of primary resources, they are overlooked by huge investors that want to check this information when engaging in services with them or buying their products. So, in the terms of international trade, international investors are the ones that put this pressure, so to say, to engage further and asking, okay, I need to see at least your sustainability reports done decently by the Global Reporting Initiative or SASB standard, and then maybe we can talk business of billions of dollars in copper, gold, or silver.
I see. That's yeah, that's encouraging, but a lot more to be done.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But wherever you have huge corporations involved with natural resources. I said that in the past it was like the bad ones, but now they are the ones pushing transparency and investor reports to acknowledge all these ESG phenomena.
Yeah, yeah. Now, it's interesting to see that you have also worked with the number one climate research company in the world. CDP. Now,
Yes.
what are the key case studies you would like to share with us of success and learnings?
Yes. Well, I have a few, but the one that struck me the most while I was working at CDP was that it's not that well known that CDP has a huge program of helping big corporations to build and assess their scope 3 emissions. And as you know, scope 3 emissions are the ones that are almost left behind, or no one uh, reports them or takes them seriously because are the most difficult to build. Scope 3 emissions, and it is said, according to CDP sources, that 70 or 80% of carbon emissions lie in the scope 3 emissions. So you could be a company and say, well, I'm carbon neutral, look at my scope 1 and 2 emissions, but what about the scope 3? So the most striking thing I saw was a beef and poultry and meat company in Brazil, huge corporation. I cannot say, but let's say they do hamburgers worldwide, and they were big partners of CTP for decades, or many years, and they had this program of tracing the scope 3 from the farm with the cows until the meat arrives to the final consumer or your customer. And it was a very detailed and hard work in the sense that we are talking about a huge corporation, a meat producer, poultry producer, milk producer. So they would have to survey thousands of providers to then start building the KPI of scope 3 emissions. And they did it successfully. So, believe it or not, that meat, that poultry was almost like very with very low carbon emissions. So, I was amazed because you are told in this big narrative that, all these products are very have a higher cost for the environment. But this meat company was like, no, we want to prove otherwise. And they had a huge work with providers in the Amazon, with the cows, with the animals, and they successfully surveyed thousands of providers to trace the scope, the emissions of all their products. So it was a huge project that they have for years now, and they do that exercise of calculating the scope 3 annually, and CDP helps them all along the way to trace that KPI and verify that the KPI is truthful and be communicated and well known to investors and other stakeholders.
So a very interesting, successful case study. Tell me some failures.
Yeah, somewhat. Sorry.
It is a very good, successful case study of the
Yeah, it
poultry.
is. It is. It is. It is. It is. So that was I witnessed it and I was amazed. Yes.
Yes. Were there any failures? Um,
Well, failures, I'd say that sometimes not all providers are willing to cooperate because when you want to raise the KPI of a scope 3, um, you need to ask every single provider in the value chain, okay, what's your carbon emission? And sometimes some of them are reluctant, but you can fix this as a company. You can fix it by setting a code of conduct for suppliers in which they compromise themselves to disclose their carbon emissions.
that's interesting. So now in Chile, what are the responsibilities, say, of a ESG manager, ESG executive head, and the likes? Since this field is constantly evolving, and thus they are not only in your country but worldwide, they are being hired in that particular position, but then they are in a perplexed situation. What all work do they have to do? So because it's like cross sector. So, what do
Yeah.
would you like to share something?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, Harsha, because what you say is true. It's a position that is evolving year by year on a yearly basis. And but I'd say that the main responsibilities of an ESG manager or executive or head of ESG, as you uh, well, let's call it like that, um, it's a lot of things. Like, firstly, if you are in a big company, your main duty is to oversee that the sustainability report of that company is well done, and it's very well communicated in your networks to all the stakeholders that the company really wants them to let. Here's my sustainability report for the year. Here, read it, assess it. Here's everything we've done. That's just one part. The other part would be a closer relationship with the stakeholders, like worry about, for example, if you're a mining company or a natural resource extracting company, you need to worry immediately of your relationship with stakeholders, closer communities to the site of extracting resources. What does the regulation say? What will I do? Or will I go beyond what regulation states? And generally, the ESG manager is not very loved when it started pushing to the other executives, saying, you know what, we need to go beyond regulation. And it would be like, okay, good luck, tell that to the board. But that's the position. So you need to try to push the company's ESG agenda with your own colleagues in, let's say, the CFO or the CEO, the COO. That's one part. And the other part would be, from time to time, be kind of an investor relations, because let's say it's a listed company, and investors in the investor call for the year to report the earnings, you need to be present and say, you know what, in ESG terms, we've done this. Uh, for example, we've been uh, quoted as a good example by BlackRock, which is a shareholder of the company, and it's a lot of work that it can involve, as I say, to sum up, it can involve communication to stakeholders in with all these reports. It can involve stakeholder relationships and also investor relations duty. So, and more duties, since this is always evolving. But I'd say it's always the ESG, the head of ESG, with one or two analysts to support this task.
Okay, that's very interesting. Um, you have also worked somewhere in sustainable finance. Now, what are the
Yeah.
best tools for sustainable finance?
Well, to be honest, like that was at the height of the pandemic. I tried some luck with sustainable finance, but I'd say that, in my opinion, it's not rocket science. It's quite simple. I'm not a finance expert, but I've seen that the first thing you need to do if you're an asset manager, for example, we have extremely huge examples like BlackRock, for example, which is top of the class in these kind of practices. But if, let's say, you work in a bank or a pension fund or institution, you need to start. Okay, what does the PRI says, which are the Principle of Responsible Investments of the United Nations? You take refuge in that methodology, so to say, in that framework, and you try to take the framework, see what it says, and apply it to your certain conditions. So the principles of responsible investment are a good tool, which will come very handy with exclusionary lists of investments, for example. So you have the principles of responsible investment of the United Nations. Then you try to do exclusionary lists of saying, okay, we're a pension fund and we do not invest in uh, non-renewable energy. This pension fund is very responsible. It invests in only companies that have I don't know, a score of B plus, or A in the CDP questionnaire, for example. I would say so. The principles of responsible investment, exclusionary list, and then finally, if you're a big company, or even if you work for your government, the green bond or carbon bond, it's a tool that has been really fashionable in the last years in Latin America. And my job there, or the job of the analyst or the consultant, would be to emit a second party opinion of the bond. That is to say, that I certify that the use of proceeds of that bond will be used for, let's say, building a wind farm or solar farm. So when the government or any powerful institution, a huge asset management institution, want to do this bond, you oversee as a third party in a very ethical way that the use of proceeds are done are will be used in sustainable projects.
That's a very responsible job. And
Yeah, well, I haven't had the chance, but I've worked in the past with colleagues, and I had the chance to see how it's done, how the process, and it's really complex, and it's a lot. It's a very responsible job, as you said.
so, how do you actually confirm the veracity of what is being issued? How do you do that?
Well, first you need to sign an NDA with the company, a non-disclosure agreement that all the information you'll see is privileged. Then you certify it, and this second party opinion is called like that second party because you as a second party independently certify, you're independent from the company, you certify that all that is good. And if you want an extra layer of protection, you can send that to a big four, one of the big four, so they can audit that and certify, okay, this is real. All these millions of dollars will be used for a wind farm or a solar farm or renewable energy. So that's how you certify.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you have been in this space for so long, and you may have seen, and it's a dynamic space, you see. So you may have seen
Yeah.
a lot of knowledge gap now and then. We are an education institution. What are the modules or topics that we should educate to the present workforce and the upcoming workforce to meet the global requirements?
Yes, very. Thank you for your wise question. Well, since my core expertise is in strategy, ESG strategy, and reports and benchmarking, I'd say that I've seen as a consultant a huge gap in the knowledge of which ESG methodology to use for certain industries and purposes, and to use it in a way that it is done as the guidelines of such methodologies tell you so. So I see that the gap to focus and work would be to teach professionals in the field the importance of, let's say, five methodologies or frameworks. Let's see, you have the CDP framework, you have the United Nations Sustainability Goals, you have the SASB framework, you have also the European Union new framework. So you need to transmit this knowledge of frameworks, ESG frameworks, why they're important and why they make a difference in any consulting job that you are part of, or team, or company. So I'd say that all these sustainability frameworks need to be taught well, and it needs to be the starting point. Because let's say, okay, I want to do an ESG project for my own company since I'm the ESG manager. Okay, but how will you do it? You will take support in which methodology of what use. For example, if you're in the real estate business, uh, SASB won't do the job entirely, and you need to go further to GRESB, which is an ESG methodology exclusively built for ESG in real estate. So you need to give students or professionals in the field the basis of all these frameworks and methodologies to uh, for them to be aware that there is a certain use for a methodology for certain industries. So your job would be to do the match between, okay, I'm working, let's say, in the renewable energy industry. So with which ESG methodology will suit me best or better? And then you start your own research, let's say the CDP methodology questionnaire. And you can use answering the questionnaire as an annual exercise in this methodology if you're a company. So to sum up, I'd say that there must be, in any academic, ESG academic context, an awareness of which ESG methodologies are the most used and what for. What for is very important because you cannot force an analysis using a methodology that won't work very well with certain industries, but will work very fairly with other industries.
And that's a great input. And I'm sure that we would work towards organizing these sessions and maybe also inviting you to take up some of the sessions for
Well,
ESG frameworks.
I'll be honored, thanks, but that's all I can say in my experience. Yeah.
Great. We have some questions from the viewers.
Okay.
Mr. Ashid Sheshadri asked, give ESG principles and practices to do list.
ESG principle and practices to-do list. Well, I'd say
It continues with
ah,
methods. Toolkits are to be made aware to ESG professionals, three-level executives.
okay. So it's Ajit asks about ESG methods. Sorry, could you read again? Like,
Maybe toolkits is what he wants to ask. That
okay,
the ESG professionals should know.
okay, the toolkit. Well, as I was saying, in my experience, you need to know, for example, as a toolkit, say, okay, that many, for example, the European Union or the United Nations, they suggest certain things like the Sustainable Development Goals, right? But that is just like the starting point. But you need to be aware of it. You need to be aware of it as a toolkit too, a very basic one. Say, okay, this is the first layer of the pyramid, right? And then you can move on to other frameworks, like reporting frameworks. For example, you have the Dow Jones questionnaire, the CDP questionnaire, the Moody's questionnaire. And even though they are like annual questionnaire that companies report, you can take them and use them as a tool for assess your own context, your own study case that you're going through. All these remember that all these methodologies, ESG methodologies, are public domain. Some of them, like, but mainly like 90%. So I'd say that as a toolkit, like, grab all the methodologies. For example, if you are focusing in the European market, like, okay, the European Union directive, or if you want something more global for emerging markets, let's say the CDP questionnaire, and use it as a methodology, or the guidelines are online, or you can do the same with the Dow Jones questionnaire, or and all that. Also, I'd say a very handy toolkit to end the question is the SASB standards. SASB standards give you guidelines and main points of what each industry should focus on in ESG terms, including KPIs and more quantitative information.
Thank you. So he is thanking you as well. It is very
Oh,
nicely
yes, for your
explained.
question.
Yeah, we have one more LinkedIn user who asked he has just graduated in BA honors in innovation, skills, and social change. Is this
Okay.
right for me? And he wants to start his own social enterprise at some point of time.
Oh, okay. Well, for that, I'd say that the social enterprise at some point. Well, let us not forget, in terms of innovation and skills for social change, that the ESG has an S on it, right, which is social. So if your focus is in innovations and skill for social change, uh, I'd say you can do some research in what ESG framework suggests in the social area. Let's say a huge part of these methodologies regarding the S pillar emphasizes stakeholder relationships with the community that go beyond the classical old-fashioned philanthropy that we've been taught is like, okay, social responsibility, but now it's very old-fashioned. So that can help you to look for some ideas or for social innovation there. Like, for example, if your community in social involvement has access to basic resources like running water or basic stuff, and that is also considered in many methodologies under the section of stakeholder relationships and community relations. So you can do some research and adapt, always adapt. Remember that methodologies are not rigid. You as a consultant or expert can adapt them to all the situations you can encounter.
That's interesting, and I hope he is satisfied with the answer.
Yeah, I hope
Uh,
to.
yeah. Thank you so very much, Francisco. It has been wonderful talking to you and learning about your journey and work. Would you have any final message for all our viewers today?
Yes. Well, first, thank you for this opportunity, Harsha, for this conversation. It's been really nice talking to you and meeting the audience. And I'd say that a final message would be that, uh, like, be creative and innovate with all this ESG information because there is a ton of ESG information out there. There's always a new methodology that some country will use or some uh, group of countries, and you have to always be informed of what these methodologies suggest, why they say, how they adapt to our current conditions, and if you master the knowledge of a certain ESG methodology, you can do a lot of things for many customers, clients, or stakeholders because a few people understand the why of these methodologies. Many people know, like, okay, they exist, they need to be applied, but why or the know how of these methodologies? Like, my advice would be submerge yourself in research of the know how of these methodologies, and you can make a difference as a consultant, as an ESG expert, or in any job that happens to require assistance in this field.
Thank you so very much, Francisco. It has been an honor having you with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Harsha. It's been an honor for me too, and if anything, like, you can invite me to to this podcast again.
Yes, yes, and also maybe taking some guest sessions for our students.
Yeah, it could be in the future. Why not?
All right. Thank you so much, and you have a lovely weekend.
You too. Have a lovely weekend in your part of the world and see you around. Thank you for the invitation.